Welcome to Young, Gifted, and Wild About Birds. I'm Matt Bell. For those of you who don't know me, I work at Connecticut Audubon Eco Travel, and I lead a lot of our trips, especially domestically across the U.S. This is the third Young, Gifted, and Wild About Birds of 2023. Our speaker tonight is Allison Black. I'm looking forward to hearing about this, especially regarding ocean species, and which are such a diverse and understudied and underappreciated family, in my opinion. Just a heads up to everyone, we'll be recording the presentation and we'll send you the video when we're all done. Everyone will be muted during the presentation. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. Please use the chat and I'll go through and pick some questions out at the end. If you'd like to use closed captioning, it is available throughout the talk. Now to introduce our speaker tonight. Allison is a seabird and marine mammal observer that spends weeks at a time aboard a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration research vessel in the North Atlantic. In fact, she'll be leaving next week for her next trip, so we're lucky to have her now, right before she goes out on the next adventure. Some of you might remember her from her days as outreach administrator at the Roger Tory Peterson Estuary Center in Old Lyme, and others may know her from the Connecticut Ornithological Association as well, where she's a member of the board of directors. Tonight, she'll share with us what her work entails and why it's important, and she has some great photos to share as well. So Allison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt. 1 second here. All right, can everybody see my presentation okay? I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So let's begin here. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. A very special thank you to the Connecticut Audubon Society for the invitation. This is the first time I have ever shared this kind of presentation before about life at sea. This is also the most fun I've had preparing a presentation. It also took a lot of time, mostly due to the fact that I've taken tens of thousands of photos at sea, and going through them to find photos for tonight took quite a bit of time. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed tonight's presentation. Hopefully you'll learn something new and further come to appreciate the ocean and all its amazing counterparts. So put your life jackets on, take that Dramamine, and we'll get started. Don't actually take Dramamine, that's a bad idea unless you want to sleep well tonight. So a quick overview for tonight. I will break this presentation up a little bit into 3 kind of uneven sections, but you'll get an intro about myself, my job, and what life is like on the ships. Of course, we'll see lots of photos of the wildlife, both birds and marine mammals that I have been lucky enough to see, as well as some of the projects I've worked on that have brought me to see them. And then we'll wrap it up with some information about related careers in the maritime industry and what you should do on your first or any pelagic trip. So here is a little bit about me. I'll keep it brief. I know you're all here for the whales and dolphins and seabirds anyway. And bear with me for these couple intro slides that are a little more text heavy. I figure we get these out of the way while everyone is still paying attention. So my official job title, which does actually go on my resume, is Seabird / Marine Mammal Observer. I contract for NOAA fisheries through a company called Integrated Statistics, which just happens to have NOAA's contract for observers at this time for the better part of the last 4 years. On the boats, though, I'm bird girl or bird lady. Because observers rotate through different boats, sometimes you have trouble remembering names, but it's easy to remember what everybody's doing. I am from Connecticut, born and raised in Norwich. And as Matt said, I'm a board member of the Connecticut Ornithological Association, recently chair of the workshops and mini grants committees. I also started and compiled Norwich's Christmas bird count. And when I'm not at sea, I am either riding my horses or wrangling our 3 cats at home. I have a bachelor's degree in zoo and wildlife biology from Malone University. Actually got my start as a zookeeper and then decided I wanted to pursue birds full time. Since I've graduated, I've worked in different roles in both nonprofit and state organizations alike. And as Matt said, I've worked previously for the Connecticut Audubon Society. Some of the more fun things I've gotten to do include living on a semi-remote island for 3 summers, studying gulls and shorebirds, which is really what got me into seabirds in the first place. And people like to know also how I got here. And a big part of working in the maritime industry is networking. It really is important that you create connections and maintain them, because that definitely can influence who you would be working for in the future. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't at least do an introduction about NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which is under the Department of Commerce. It's really the reason we're all here tonight. These are photos of 4 of the ships that I have sailed on with NOAA, and the ones that I sail on most regularly. I've taken a few trips on all of these boats. As you can read, there are 15 current research and survey ships. There are a number of ships actually in the works to be built. And they also have 9 aircraft that are managed through OMAO. It's actually the largest fleet of research ships in the US. There are some universities that also have research vessels, but NOAA has the most. And they do a lot of different things, which this is all things that I did not know about until I really got into this job, and have learned just so much through my experiences. But boats like the Ronald Brown, for example, which is based out of Charleston, South Carolina, is the largest vessel at 275 feet. That is an atmospheric research vessel and is NOAA's only global class ship, which will sail literally all over the world, and service weather buoys, as well as do a lot of instrumentation, as compared to the Henry Bigelow and the Pisces, which are sister ships, and they are fisheries research vessels. And they do a lot of fish sampling, population estimates, and already serviced a lot as well for us observers. And then the Gordon Gunter, which I will talk a little bit more about because I have some photos of the inside of that, is also a fisheries vessel. In this photo here of the Pisces, you might be able to see a little black dot right there, and that's me. One of NOAA's aircraft was doing aerial marine mammal surveys, and it actually flew over the Pisces while we were doing also doing marine mammal and seabird surveys. So they happened to snap a shot of us as they flew by, which I thought was pretty cool. So we'll talk about ship life a little bit. This is me on the dock in Newport, Rhode Island, standing in front of the Gordon Gunter. This is a nice little video here. We're gonna take a little trip. So this is us, just a quick video of us as we're about to sail under the Newport Bridge, the Pell Bridge, leaving the naval station in Newport, which is where NOAA has a dock and the Henry Bigelow is based out of, as we were headed out to sea for the beginning of an Ecomon cruise. I apologize for background noise to tune people out, but it's a pretty good view from the flying bridge. Before you get comfortable on the ships, though, we have to do drills, which are mandated by the Coast Guard. There are 3 different drills that we do regularly on the ships. This fire and emergency drill and the abandoned ship drill we do weekly. This bar here and these dots and bar here are the length of the whistle that will blow as we do the drills, which is not subtle, so you will hear it at any given time. These report to areas or where you are supposed to muster depending on the ship and what your role is on the ship. So for me, I'm a scientist. I'm on the ship Henry Bigelow, and this is an AMAPS cruise, which is specific to marine mammals. So these are put on your door, and you need to know this information because when that whistle goes off, you are to get to your station immediately. There's also this bulletin board here that will be posted on all the ships, which lists everyone's fire and emergency stations, everyone's man overboard drills, and everyone's abandoned ship drill stations. The crew members that are manning the boat, they actually have to participate in full fire drills, where they create a fake mock fire somewhere on the boat, and they are to respond as if there was an actual emergency or a pipe burst or things like that. So our role as a scientist on these ships is much less involved, but we do have to allow the crew to do these. So we usually do that one of the first couple days when we set sail, so everyone understands where they're supposed to go in case of one of those different emergencies. The abandoned ship drill is probably one of the more interesting ones because you're required to don what's right here in this barrel-shaped bag. This is your immersion suit or your life-saving suit or your Gumby suit. You are required to put that on in under 2 minutes. Obviously, the faster the better, because if you have to put that on in a real emergency, it means the ship is going down and you need to get off. So that is something that we do. You only have to put it on the first time we do the drill, and then after that, you just have to assemble with it. You also bring your life jacket here, and they all have whistles and lights attached to them. They're quite fancy. And then sometimes we'll do these other drills. My friend Kelsey here is demonstrating a loss of power or smoke drill where you wouldn't be able to see. So you basically are blindfolded, and you have to find your way out from the inside the ship to the outside of the ship as practice. There are a number of people who live and work on these ships. My time there is only during when we're at sea, but this group of folks here are the people who keep that boat running all year round. So the command are NOAA Corps officers, which I will talk about more later. These are the ones who drive the vessel, who communicate with other ships, who dock the boat, all that stuff. The engineering department obviously keeps the boats running. Excuse me, the deck crew depends. Deck crew does different jobs depending on what type of vessel. So the atmospheric research vessels, they do a lot of buoy recovery, crane operations, all that kind of stuff. The deck crew on this boat, for example, the Gordon Gunter, they do more fisheries related things. So trawling, net retrieval, things like that. The steward department, very important. They're the ones who feed us, and they're the ones who get all our linens for all the beds and things like that. They provide the snacks. Again, very important people. And then we always have an electronics technician. Sometimes there's more who handle all of anything related to internet or connections on the ship, the GPS, things like that. And also not listed here are survey techs. I'll talk about survey techs at the end of my presentation as well. The Gunter doesn't have any, but a lot of the other ships do. And then this right here is the little pile of scientists. So this was our first cruise post-COVID in 2021. So we only had 7 scientists on this trip. I've sailed with as many as 30 before, but only 7 on this because at the time we were still keeping everyone in their own room should there be a COVID issue. Over here, you'll see a plan of the day, and I apologize for these kind of terrible photos. I didn't think I'd ever be using them in a presentation. I usually just take a photo of the board so I can remember who's on the boat and what's happening that day. But this will give you, what ship we're on, what cruise we're doing, what the day is, the sea state, what time sunrise and sunset is, which is important for us observers, and then it'll give you sort of the plan. So, and then if you need any issues, you always just report to this email. And usually there's some sort of meme or funny thing. This one just happens to be about me, about how everybody kept seeing things and no one would remember to take photos and tell me about it. So accommodations here on the boat. I know everyone's interested. I get a lot of questions about what the rooms look like. So it depends on the ship, it depends on the setup, but generally speaking, the fisheries vessels are some of the more comfortable ones. There's usually 2 beds in each one. Space is tight, as you can see, but it's livable. There's usually a locker where you can put your things. Sometimes heads are shared, sometimes you get one for 2 people. Again, just depends on the boat. And obviously, very tight security measures are put in to ensure that things do not fall over during the weather. I've had some of the best night's sleep of my life on boats. You know, it's dark. They have nice blackout curtains. It's usually pretty cold on the boats. You know, slight gentle rocking of the ship, white noise. Really, it does the job. But I've also had some of my worst nights of sleep on the boat because when we are in bad weather, everything is tossing, including you in your own bunk. There's usually a small gym on the boat as well, which I didn't include any photos of, but I do not recommend running on a treadmill on a ship. It's surprisingly difficult when the boat is moving. This is the inside of the Gordon Gunter. So this is a slightly more luxurious accommodations. It's called the Hotel Gunter amongst the fleet. The Gunter is a repurposed Navy ship, formerly called the Relentless, which was a submarine hunter in the Cold War. It was transferred to NOAA and repurposed and refitted to be a fisheries research vessel in the early 90s. So because of that history of sub hunting, the rooms were built for contractors, civilian contractors, who would be on the ship to run the equipment. So the rooms are a little bit more spacious. You have these kind of emergency fold down bunks, but they're not often used. You often get your own room. And your own desk and all that kind of stuff too. So I like sailing on the Gunter, which also has probably the best steward in the fleet. So we also usually have a small lounge or movie room. The NOAA ships are able to get Navy DVDs, which will sometimes release films that are still in movie theaters. So I've actually seen a number of movies before I've gotten back to land, even though they're still in theaters. Some of the cruises can be very social. When we have cruises, for example, like AMAPs, which are a big team of observers for marine mammals, and we're all in the day shift together. We have the same schedule, so we'll play card games together, you know, when the weather is bad or when we have nights off together, and it can be a lot of fun. But because the boat is doing 24-hour operations, that's not always the case. You might be on a complete opposite shift from a lot of people. People ask me about what boat food is like, and I can tell you it's not too shabby. I have never starved on a NOAA boat, that is for sure. It depends on, again, not every boat is created equal. Some of them have better food than others. It's quite funny about how I would say some of the more southern-based boats, for example, NOAA has a dock based in Pascagoula, Mississippi. There's a bit more fried chicken on those boats maybe than some of the other boats, but in New England, we get a lot of seafood, and actually on the fisheries boats, they'll actually catch seafood sometimes because they have a fishing permit, and we're able to have that. So you can see some of our crab legs here. And then this one, this photo here, we were encountering some rough weather, so we had to anchor in the Newport Harbor, and it was 4th of July weekend. So we had a nice 4th of July barbecue and a nice view of the Newport Bridge as well. I tend to bring my own pile of snacks because, you know, being on a ship means that you're only limited to what's available. I usually like to take myself grocery shopping while I'm hungry and impulsively buy things so that I will crave things when I'm back out at sea, and I will have what I was hoping to have. It's a proven technique, I promise. So life as a seabirder is pretty good. Couple of things here for my primary responsibilities. It's pretty straightforward. Identify and record birds, marine mammals, sea turtles. Usually birds are the priority. Depending on the cruise, we'll have a separate dedicated marine mammal team. The cruises are between 14 and 28 days, depending on the trip. Not the fun kind of cruise. This is a government vessel, no alcohol allowed. We identify animals as best we can. We estimate their distance from the ship, and we record it in whatever data program that cruise uses. We also try to add extra things into that if possible: behavior, age, sex, direction, moving. And really the overall blanket goal is quantifying abundance and distribution. We usually work the day shifts, like I said. It depends on the number of observers on the ship. Sometimes I have been the only observer on the boat, so I tend to work all day. Sometimes there is one other observer. That tends to be the most common for me, and we rotate on and off every 2 hours. We're always on the flying bridge or the bridge. So the bridge is the central command of the vessel, or the flying bridge, which is the level above that. It means you're exposed to the elements, but it's definitely the best view on the boat, so I can't complain too much. Photography is definitely a fun component of it, but it is not a requirement, thank goodness, because I'm not a professional photographer. This photo is from one of my earlier cruises, so I have since upgraded camera equipment, thankfully. There are definitely some perks to that. I have seen some amazing animals that I know most people probably don't get the opportunity to experience. And when you're at sea, you know, you're in this environment where people are all working towards a really interesting scientific goal, and you're in obviously a very unique environment, and that can be really inspiring, and it keeps things fun, I think. And as I list here, I get quite a bit of overtime because we're working 12 hours a day, and that it helps pay the bills, to be honest. There are definitely some cons, though. You know, once you set sail from the dock, they're not going back unless you are actually dying. So you have to kind of keep that in mind as you plan your cruises for the year and the activities you want to do. Ships are also very loud. You have to be able to hopefully sleep either with earplugs or be one of those people that can sleep through anything. And weather is a very, very big component of our day. So that will affect a lot of things, including our ability to detect animals, general life on the ship, and whether we're actually out there or not. I'll talk about weather a little bit more in this section here. Some days, like I said, you can have a great day and it's beautiful. This is us sailing southward through the Cape Cod Canal. You know, you get those good days where the sky is blue and the weather is calm and everything is beautiful. And then you get some of the bad days, which I will talk about shortly. But I thought I would show you some of the nicer days that we've had out at sea, so hopefully you can appreciate. Most of them are sunset photos because the sunsets at sea are just not able to be compared. This is a shot from the flying bridge of the Gunter. Very photogenic boat. Nice and flat out here. And then you get days like this, where you can't even see past the ship's bow. Unfortunately, when this happens, we're mandated to blast a foghorn every 2 minutes. And usually that is positioned, unfortunately, directly behind us on the flying bridge. So when the weather is this bad, unfortunately, we're not able to observe. We actually don't usually observe in conditions where you can't see more than 300 meters past the boat, or in a Beaufort 8, which is waves between 13 and 20 feet and winds between 34 and 40 knots. For some of them, for safety reasons, when the boat is moving that much, it's difficult to hold on, let alone look through binoculars. And also you can lose birds in the trough of waves when they are that high. This is a photo from some of the bad days at sea. You can see it's a little rough out there, lots of white caps. This was also taken on the Gunter. And I included a little inset here of something I might be wearing on a day like that. So you have to bundle up out there. It is a bit chilly, especially when you're in the North Atlantic. I'd like you to take a look at this here. This is a Beaufort scale. Some of you might be familiar with this. So this is basically what dictates the sea state. It's kind of a combination of the knots of wind as well as the height of waves. So take a look at, this section, I would say down here, about how high the waves are and what number that corresponds to. I'm going to show a video clip next here of some rough weather. So if you get really seasick, look away. Pay attention to the waves. And remember that I am 45 feet high in the air on a 275-foot boat. And if you are able to, drop the answer of what you think the Beaufort number is into the chat. And Matt, I will ask you to just read a couple out loud of guesses of people.
They had boats that were made pretty much entirely out of beer cans.
That was a solid wave. Yeah, that's where you should have been up there. It's
All right, Matt, anybody drop a answer in the chat? I'll go back to that slide here so people can decide what they think that Beaufort was. Any guesses at all?
We have 3 people saying 8, 3 people saying 9, 3 people saying 10.
Good. Great. So I would actually say 10 for this one. The waves we guessed are between 22 and 24 feet high, and I'll play that again just real quick for you, now knowing that those waves are that high. That's one of those days where it is difficult to, I'm actually on the bridge on that one. Tough day out there. And that was also the second day of a cruise I was on, and it is much harder to get your sea legs when the sea is like this. We had a very large cruise that time. There was about 30 scientists as well as 30 crew members, and I think half the scientists didn't leave their room for 2 days because of this weather. All right, so we went over the intro part here. We're going to move on to what you're going to see. We're going to look at lots of photos of mammals and birds and boats, oh my, as well as some of the data from projects I've worked on. We'll start with the birds. This here is a great shearwater. I included photos of some of my favorite species I've seen along the way, and as well as some of the more interesting ones. There's no good way to put this on a slide, but this is the approximate list of birds that I have seen while standing on a NOAA research vessel. And the photos that you'll see forthcoming are either by myself or my friend Doug Gotchfeld, who I have sailed with a number of times and kindly lent me photos because he is a much better photographer than I am. Doug's actually in Borneo right now leading a tour for field guides. Lucky him. But like I said, lots of different birds here. This is taxonomics. You can see it goes from ducks to the true seabirds into the sandpipers a little bit here. Gulls. I don't include too many photos of gulls and terns on this particular talk because they're relatively common for those who are on land. Into some of the more interesting birds here, and then I have seen a bunch of warblers and sparrows at sea, and I'll showcase a few of them actually as well. We'll start with the seabirds. This is a red-footed booby that landed on the ship that I was on last September off the coast of Florida. Everyone's favorite's the classic shearwaters. Thankfully, Doug took some amazing photos for me. For those who have not been to sea, these are probably the best looks that you would ever get at a bird like this. Most of the time they kind of buzz by the boat quickly, especially if we're not dragging any food behind us. And you have to remember, again, I'm 40 feet up in the air, so I'm not usually eye level with these birds, which makes it even more difficult to photograph. I didn't include Audubons and Manx shearwater. They're a little bit more difficult to photograph, mostly on their size, and they're quite flighty, but nice sooty shearwater here. You can see this lighter coloring under the wings that will flash and help separate them from Cory shearwater, which is a much whiter, also an overall larger bird and sort of a lumbering flight to it. Sometimes the yellow bill is visible depending on light. Great shearwater is definitely our most common species we see out on the Northeast cruises. Dark black beak on this, usually a smudge on the belly, and one of the more boat friendly birds that will come in a little closer. Here are a few petrels and storm petrels. Black-capped petrels are probably the most common ones we see in the Gulf Stream. We don't really see them outside of that. I've seen a few Trinidad petrels. Sadly, the only ones I've seen have been past the economic exclusion zone, the EEZ, so more than 200 miles offshore, which for you bird listers does not count for my ABA or US list, unfortunately. Some nice photos here by Doug of our storm petrel friends. The white-faced storm petrel is increasing in numbers more frequently on these late summer and early fall East Coast pelagics that go to those offshore canyons, which is pretty exciting because if you have not seen a white-faced storm petrel bouncing like a kangaroo across the top of the water, you should probably look up a YouTube video of it after this talk because it is amazing to watch them. Nice little comparison shot here between leeches and bandrump storm petrels. You can see a slight size difference as well as overall body color. Nice carpal band here on this leeches storm petrel as compared to much more pale on the bandrumped. And then here on the leeches, you can see these nice strong carpal bars again, as well as a notch in the tail. Wilson storm petrel can be separated by a little bit more straightforward wing here, and they have their little feeties that extend past their tail, which is another helpful identifier for them. Some of my favorites to see are the kleptoparasites of the sea here, the skuas and Jaegers. I feel like I always hear the cops theme song Bad Boys when one of them blazes on by because they're just trolling around looking for something to jump on and steal food from. They don't usually give us the time of the day when we're on the boats. They're kind of quick and gone. They're not great to photograph. This picture of a parasitic Jaeger is honestly usually the better ones. I've just got very lucky for these photos that I took. This is a nicer photo of a Pomeranian Jaeger, a nice adult. You can see its signature little spoons here. We get a fair number of South Polar skuas. We also get some greats depending on the time of the year, but I'm not going to go into bird ID because we do not have enough time for that tonight. So I'll cover some of my favorites to watch, brown boobies. They are venturing further north than they ever have been before, presumably riding the Gulf Stream up and then wandering as far as Canadian waters where I've seen them. They like to follow the ships. They kind of wait for us to flush flying fish out of the water, and then they will dive bob them, which I have somehow managed to capture in this photo here. Brown boobies are fun because they come at different plumages at different ages. This is a juvenile bird here. This is a bird that's on its way to adulthood, and this is, though hard to tell, you can see it's a nice clean cut here as an adult bird. They don't often land on the boats for me just because we don't see them as much in the Northeast, but I know down south lots of birds, lots of boobies will land on the NOAA boats down there. These were pretty exciting birds for me. My most recent lifers at sea, red-footed and masked boobies. This red-footed booby is a juvenile, otherwise I'd have a little bit darker color to it and actually much more red feet, but kind of orange pale feet as a young bird. This is a younger masked booby as well, and then got a nice look at this adult that flew by our boat. They don't chase the ships like the brown boobies do, but it was fun that this red-footed one ended up landing on the ship for the night, which was cool. Where we were in Florida, we were actually in view of the SpaceX rocket that was supposed to launch last September. And there was an exclusion zone outside the coast that we thought we were actually outside of, but we were not. So SpaceX actually had to call the boat and tell us to get out. Moving on to some of the not seabirds, but I have seen at sea. This is a cliff swallow that showed up on a boat back in May. Because I sail in the spring and fall, I get a lot of interesting migrants off of the ships. So this was one back in May of 2019. One more little clip here to drop in the chat. I'll play this a couple times. Can anyone guess what this little bird is that is on the stern safety cables of the ship? You can drop in the chat. I'll play the video. It's real quick, a couple times. Any answers?
Yep, everyone is responding so far. Black-throated blue. We have one junco as well.
Good job, most of you. Black-throated blue warbler, nice male, another spring migration. It is so interesting when you see a deciduous nesting neotropic migrant like that perched on a cable wire with the ocean in the background. I'd like to tell you about one special little bird that landed on a ship. This is Toby. I'm not sure how he got that name, but Toby the cedar waxwing. I hope you like puns. This was a young cedar waxwing, likely in fall migration, that landed on a ship I was on 4 days before we were scheduled to arrive back to port, and we were pretty far out. We noticed he was in kind of rough shape. He was kind of sitting on the ground like this and was trying to eat this piece of plastic that is, in his defense, fairly berry-shaped, as if you know anything about cedar waxwings, they do love berries. So I was sailing with Doug at the time, and Doug and I did what any normal birders would do. We stole blueberries from the salad bar and scattered them around the ship for Toby to find, which was very successful. Not a lot of birds do well when they land on ships. In fact, most of them don't make it. But for these frugivores, this is actually a pretty ideal situation. So we continued to lay blueberries around the ship, and Toby continued to find said berries and continued to eat the blueberries, which made for some fun photo sessions for us. You know, it's hard to not to anthropomorphize here, but when you're watching this little bird choke down every single blueberry it can find, it's hard to not feel proud that you're the reason it's surviving. Sparrows can do okay on the boats as well because we can leave trail mix and seeds and other things, but warblers do not do well once they land on the boats. Eventually, the chief steward caught on to what we were doing with stealing blueberries, and they just gave us a whole container to leave out for Toby, which we did. You can see this great photo of Toby flying away with a little blueberry in his beak. Toby was seen the day before we pulled back into port. But we did not see him the day we pulled in. So we like to think that he took off that night from the ship and made it to land fueled by blueberries. All right, we're gonna have a little warbler quiz time. And I'm sure you're all thinking to yourselves, but wait, I thought this was a presentation on seabirds. Or that's a blue-headed vireo, Allison. Maybe you should just stick to seabird ID. You might be partially right about one of those. Just for funsies, I'm gonna show some shots of 10 of the 18 species of warblers I have seen from ships. This is a self-test quiz, no need to drop answers on the chat on this one. Let's begin. So these are 6 of the species I have seen from NOAA ships. You'll notice number 2 is listed here twice. I'll do just a couple seconds for this one. Again, you don't have to write these down, just see if you can name them out loud to yourself. Some of these are pretty easy, in my opinion, because they're in their nice breeding plumage. Some of them not so much, might be a little more difficult. And then on to the other 4 here. So again, 4 different species here. Also all seen from a boat. It's such an interesting experience, again, to see these coniferous and deciduous nesting, small, colorful birds flitting around the ship. All right, let's see how you did here. Blackburnian warbler, black-throated blue, northern water thrush, Wilson's warbler, northern parula, blackpoll warbler, bay-breasted warbler, American redstart, Cape May warbler, and prairie warbler. I say a rest in peace to the Cape May warbler because that actually ended up dying in my hands a couple hours later because it was so weak when it got to the ship it was not able to make it off. Bonus white-throated sparrow, I know, also not a warbler, another bird that we actually get a fair amount that lands on the ships during migration. few other interesting birds along the way. Eastern meadowlark, that was a surprise. Definitely not a bird you expect to see at sea. I actually watched it flying alongside the ship and accidentally hit a wave, and we thought it was a goner, but it actually bounced right back up, so that was surprising. Purple finch, spotted sandpiper, dark-eyed junco, mourning dove, all sorts of interesting birds that we see especially during migration times. I just love this photo. This is the same spotted sandpiper from the last slide. You know, if you ever just have one of those moments where you find yourself in a situation and you wonder what choices you've made in life that have brought you to where you are in that moment, I feel like the spotted sandpiper is having one of those moments, given that we were about 100 miles offshore off the continental shelf, and it was probably wondering what it was doing with itself at the time. On to a couple of the bigger birds. It's been a terrible storm we were having. Very smart Rachel here and parked himself on the boat for the night. And again, I didn't include species like gulls and terns in the slides because they're just much more common, even on land. Some of our birds of prey here, we get a fair number of peregrine falcons, which is also a reason some of the warblers don't survive. And probably my most interesting bird was this Eurasian hobby that landed on a ship. My first ever cruise with NOAA, 3 days into the cruise, I spotted what looked like a soaking wet peregrine falcon. If you remember the video from earlier where we were tossing so much, that was the weather we were in. Didn't really think much of it, got back to land and posted a picture of it and got a flurry of messages. It turns out that this is the second US East Coast record of Eurasian hobby, which is a small, as the name implies, falcon from Eurasia. There are less than 5 records of this bird in the lower 48 states as well. So that's probably one that's going to be tough to beat for me in the future. And again, I know this talk is supposed to be about birds, but I had to include at least a few slides in the marine mammals as they are a big part of my job as well. This here is a common dolphin, and as the name implies, they are quite common offshore, possibly the most common marine mammal species in the world, and we see quite a few of them. This is my short list of marine mammals and friends. You'll notice that I included even a few insects because we can get those on the boat too. Insects do migrate. I didn't include monarchs because I forgot to. Like I said, this is a list off the top of my head and it is ever evolving. I've seen a fair number of sharks. Sharks are actually quite difficult to identify from the boats usually because we're up so high and we don't really stop to identify things. So dolphins are a little bit easier because they tend to approach the ships. Whales can be a little more difficult because we keep our distance from them because they don't move as quickly. But I'm pretty proud of this list here. I've seen some fun things and I will share some of those with you. Here's some of my favorite dolphin species that we've seen. Striped dolphins are one of my favorites. I mean, they're just gorgeous, gorgeous animals, and they are just some of the more acrobatic members of the ocean. Bottlenose, obviously, everyone knows about bottlenose dolphins. Clymenes are a really interesting dolphin. You can see a little bit of that pink tinge to their bellies. They're a beautiful dolphin as well. Spinner dolphins with their giant breadstick nose, as we call it. And then Rizzo's dolphins, which are also called grampus. They're a larger dolphin that will start off very dark as young animals, and then as they get older, they lighten up, and they actually are, their signature identification is that they are covered in scars because they tend to play with their teeth on each other a lot. It's really interesting. Here's some of the whales we've seen. My whale photos are sort of purposefully subpar here because this is often the look that I'm getting. Again, we're not a whale watching boat. You know, we're not approaching these animals unless it's under permit to obtain more information about them, such as individual identification, pod size, etc. These are really the looks that I'm getting for the most part. And while it makes for poor photography, it definitely makes you a better observer because you learn to identify from quick and specific field marks. So blue whale was a big highlight for me, as well as my first and only killer whale last year, Old Tom, which was seen just outside the mouth of the Bay of Fundy. And then I included pilot whales and killer whales are not actually whales. They're actually members of the dolphin family, but for the namesake, I put them in this section. A few other friends along the way. Basking sharks are pretty, when they are in the areas that we are sailing through, we will see quite a few of them because they tend to breach, which is pretty exciting to watch. A little terrifying the first time you watch because they can get pretty large. I've also seen whale shark before. which is pretty cool, but tough to identify because they don't have really tall dorsals that stick out of the water like some of the other animals do. We see a fair number of giant ocean sunfishes. This is the nominate species, mola mola. We see a fair number of turtles depending on the year, and not as many devil rays. They tend to be a pretty quick in and out, so that one was pretty lucky. I got to see that nice Chilean devil ray on a marine mammal specific cruise. If there's one thing that I can get you to think about moving forward after this presentation, it's to please think twice before you buy balloons. I cannot tell you the number and diversity of balloons I've seen on the ocean. I mean, you name it, I've seen it. 4th of July, Mother's Day, birthdays, congrats, grad, engagement, wedding balloons, movie characters. Oh my gosh, the number of Frozen movie balloons alone I have seen at sea. And besides being overpriced and short-lived, balloons obviously cause a real threat to the environment. I mean, look at this example. This looks close enough to a jellyfish that I have no doubt that a leatherback turtle would probably take a bite into it and then become entangled. Please consider other gifts to celebrate occasions with your friends and family. It's the right choice. All right, data time. It'll be painless, I promise. Just a few of the cruises I've been a part of. NOAA loves its acronyms, as I've shown here. There's actually a joke that NOAA stands for the National Organization for the Advancement of Acronyms. And you can see that very clearly from the ones that have been put together here. Again, AMAPS is the ones that are marine mammal specific focused. I'm supposed to leave, actually fly a week from today for a Southeast AMAPS cruise, which I'm very excited about because I get to focus just on seabirds for those cruises, and they have a dedicated team of marine mammals. Sporopal was a really interesting cruise that I've been able to be a part of, which is specifically focusing on the continental shelf and the diversity that comes from that. It's also who we named our cat after, Spyro. The Ecomon cruises are sort of my bread and butter cruises. I sail on them 2 to 3 times a year, spring, summer, fall, and they are based here in the Northeast, and we sample all over the Northeast to get an idea of, as the name implies, the health of the ecosystem up here. I sailed quite a bit on an ECOA cruise last year, which focuses on ocean acidification and the changes that are seen there. And just to showcase a little bit of these, so in an AMAPS cruise, as I said, you have a dedicated team of marine mammal observers. They use these high-powered mounted binoculars here. There's usually 2 teams of 4, 3 people on at once that rotate through on the forward deck here. And then where I'm standing on the flying bridge, there's another team as well. And then there's 2 seabird observers that rotate. Nice day like today, nice clear calm water, easy to spot marine mammals. But as you can see from this little graph here, this is another example of the Beaufort scale. So these lines here are tracks that we did, survey tracks, and the colors indicate what the Beaufort scale was at the time. The marine mammal observers do not observe in over a 5 because the conditions are just too rough. Again, the seabird observers go all the way up to an 8. I just like to point that out. But you can see here some of these tracks when we're reaching 5s here, detection rate for the animals goes down quite a bit. So we do try to repeat those transects when that happens. On to the next one. Sporopal Eco is a cool cruise because we did a lot of this here, CTDs, which is temperature, conductivity, and depth. This measures a number of ocean parameters and can sample water at any depth, which is pretty exciting. We also do this here, which is launching some manned machines into the water that can be driven around to also detect a number of these similar things for CTDs, but in specific locations. Again, Ecomon cruises, some of my favorite cruises. You can see a little bit of the data here from some of the previous ones, number of days that we sailed. This was all last year. Total distance that we sailed, how many days we were at sea, how many individual sightings that we all saw as the observers. I'd like to point this picture out here. This is the fall Ecomon of 2021, where myself and 3 other women were the only women on board. There were 23 other crew members, all men. That is not uncommon, but that was probably the smallest ratio that I have ever sailed with before. Generally, this is our usual pack of scientists for the Ecomon, as well as the crew members. Just another quick graph here. This shows the number of species that make up 75% of our sightings. So in the springtime in southern New England, SNE, 75% of the birds we see are under this category here. And then on the shelf, the continental shelf, again, 75% of the species are listed here. We didn't have data for this particular year for fall, so that's why there's nothing on those. And then the bolded actually is 50% of the species. So in conclusion, great shearwaters are probably the most common birds that we see almost any time of the year out at sea. And this is a quick visual of survey tracks that were done for marine mammal and seabirds in 2022. This again is it looks like a lot, but in reality, it's just because the lines are kind of thick. This is 50 something days at sea. Again, with the boat being in 24-hour operations, we can get around pretty quickly. So last section here, we'll jump through. I'll just cover a few of the different careers in the maritime industry that are related to this, and then what you can do on your first pelagic. So I'll talk about these three careers: protected species observing, survey technicians, and the NOAA Corps. All have similar education requirements or work in the same setting. Each of them have different responsibilities, but if you're a recent college grad or an undergrad now, this is something I would pay attention to. I certainly did not know these careers existed upon graduation. Protected species observing is probably the most similar to my role in terms of data collection, but they don't do birds. You're often using Big S for this. And you usually contract for various organizations. Sometimes they're for energy companies, because they are required by federal law to have observers on vessels or on shore, wherever they're operating, to shut down for any disturbance to wildlife. Some companies will offer benefits to you if you contracted them for a certain number of days a year, but generally speaking, it's kind of a contract by contract basis. You usually need a bachelor's degree for this as well, or the equivalent experience, which can be a little difficult to get. You need a PSO certification, which a number of different companies offer that, and it's an online course that you take and have to pass. You do need to get a BOSIET or a Hewitt certification. BOSIET stands for Basic Offshore Safety, Induction, and Emergency Training, and Hewitt stands for Helicopter Underwater Evacuation Training, which is exactly what it is. They strap you into a fake helicopter body and plunge you underwater and require you to escape repeatedly. So a little bit more intense there, but that certification is thankfully good for 5 years. And you also have to do a pretty comprehensive medical exam, obviously, for working offshore. Survey technicians, I did mention them. They work on NOAA ships. This is a federal job, so full retirement at 30 years. Depending on the vessel that you work on will depend on what your role is on that boat. The hydrography boats do ocean floor mapping, where the atmospheric boats do a lot of technical machine running and operation. The fisheries vessels sample fish and invertebrates. So your job could change quite a bit, but the requirements are about the same. It's basically an undergrad degree in some of the more technical sciences. And you are assigned to a vessel for the most part. So you usually stay with that one vessel. This is my friend Katie. She is a senior survey tech for NOAA. She is assigned to the Henry B. Bigelow, which again is based out of Newport, Rhode Island, which is a fisheries vessel. So Katie gets to do a lot of interesting fishing things. And she is also, NOAA has a program where you can be certified to dive. So she is also a certified master diver. Pretty cool stuff. And I will get to see Katie later this year when I sail on the Bigelow. Finally, I'll talk about the NOAA Corps, which I did not know about until I sailed on NOAA boats. It's a uniform commission officer service under the Department of Commerce. It's a small conglomerate, less than 400 officers. You have the full rights and privileges of any armed forces branch, and prior service time is honored. So if you were prior enlisted, you got out, used your GI Bill, got a bachelor's degree in a STEM-related field, you could join the NOAA Corps, and that time will be honored. Full retirement's at 20 years, but you can get out at any time after your first initial 3 years because you don't sign contracts like you do in other branches. It's a really interesting role. As I said in my previous slides, they drive the research vessels and they also rotate through a land assignment. As you can see at the bottom there, you'll do 2 years at sea on a boat, then a 3-year land assignment approximately, unless you join the aviation section, which you will go to right after you go to BOTC. Requirements for NOAA. And the NOAA Corps is also a bachelor's degree because it is an officer commission, preferably in STEM. You will have to interview if you are selected to join the NOAA Corps. Basic Officer Training Course, or BOTC, is held alongside the Coast Guard officers here at the Coast Guard base in Connecticut. And again, with any federal employment, interviews and background checks are definitely going to be required this. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I feel like a lot of folks in the STEM world could probably benefit in and do well in a career like this if they had known about it ahead of time. So last, you know, maybe this has inspired you to go on your first pelagic trip, or you've been thinking about it and you just don't know what to do. Here's a few tips from someone who has spent some time on boats at sea. Most importantly, take the meds. If you are not sure you get seasick, take the meds. It depends on what works better for you. I usually take seasickness meds the day we leave dock, especially my first cruise of the year. It's hard to get your sea legs back, especially if it's been a while. Dramamine knocks me out, so I prefer Bonine, but find what's right for you, read the instructions, and please follow them, please. Be prepared, you know, check the weather the night before, bring the right clothes, bring layers, bring snacks, and bring your binoculars. Usually, generally speaking, an 8x42 is a better choice for binoculars versus a 10x because it's a wider field of view, and you won't be, it'll be easier to adjust with the waves. I use the 10x, but it's because I'm on a more stable vessel, but I would generally recommend an 8x for most people. Sleep is really important. The more tired you are, the more seasickness can be exacerbated. Keep snacking if you can throughout the day. Keep your stomach not empty, but not too full. And stay outside if you can. Focus on the horizon. I have found that chatting with others can help distract you if you're starting to feel seasick because it helps you not focus on yourself. Definitely come prepared, know what species to expect for that time of year and what area you're going to. Try to memorize a few ID points. It'll definitely help you not miss things when things go by. And of course, have fun. Remember, the captain out there is trying to find and see the seabirds and marine mammals just as much as you are. So they're trying their best for sure. So with that, I will take any questions.
Okay, we'll see if anyone drops questions in the chat. I have gotten a couple direct messages. One of the first questions I got was in regards to your the vagrants you see. Are they blown out there? Why are you seeing the songbirds out there? What is their reason for being out there?
That's a good question. And it probably depends on the bird and the weather conditions. Some of them definitely, we'll see hurricane effects for sure because we do sail during hurricane season. That's when things can get a bit dicey out there. But we will see for sure birds that are, especially songbirds, that are blown in by more difficult weather. But you also see more birds when you're in peak migration season, and there's been a big flight the night before. There's just going to be birds that just don't get it right, and they end up out on the ships and just try to come down for the first closest thing that they can see that looks like something they can land on. And then the brown boobies, for example, which are just undergoing a big population growth and are just exploring, and the Gulf Stream isn't an easy way for them to ride up and kind of hop off of that. So it depends on the species, but there certainly is a little bit of a variety there depending on where we are and what we're looking at.
Perfect. Another question I got was, do you submit bird lists, eBird, or do the mammal people use iNaturalist to submit the mammal sightings?
Yeah, that's a good question. I try to keep up with eBird, but it is difficult because I'm also trying to keep track of birds for my job. So eBird kind of comes second. I definitely try to put in the rare birds as sort of incidentals, though they are not incidental because I am birding as my primary role there. But due to the fact that it's difficult to obtain effort for those that do eBird while you're underway, it is a lot to manage. So I try to do them incidentally, especially the rare ones. The marine mammal observers, some of them might use iNaturalist, but for the most part, it's really difficult to get photos of them while they're observing. So it is difficult to manage both of those at once.
Another question was, all the mammals you had photos of, those are all in the North Atlantic, correct? Yes.
Yep. Everything I've seen somewhere between the Gulf of Maine all the way down to southern Florida.
Let's see. We also have a question. Are you allowed to remove the balloons from the water, or do you have to leave them?
So sometimes if we can grab them on the way, we will. But for the most part, I'm looking at we would never get any work done if we stopped to grab every balloon. We do grab a few here and there. opportunistically, but it is basically impossible. And they're really concentrated in more areas than others. There's quite a few in like the New York Bight, for example, just because the water moves a little bit less there, so the balloons concentrate there. So again, opportunistically, but definitely would kill any time for research.
We had a question a bit more about your upcoming cruise. Where does it start and end, and what is the most likely species that you'll see?
Good question. I don't normally sail this time of year, so the species one is will also be interested to see. I'm flying down to Norfolk, Virginia. NOAA has a dock where a number of ships are based out of in Norfolk, and I will be back on the Gordon Gunter again, Hotel Gunter, and we'll be doing again a Southeast AMAPS cruise. We will do one leg that's approximately 3 weeks, and then end up back in Norfolk, have a few days off, and then we will do another leg of again approximately 3 weeks, and we will sail around the coast of Florida and end up in Pascagoula, Mississippi. So I haven't done any surveys in the Gulf yet. Usually, like I said, that belongs to the Southeast office, and I generally contract for the Northeast. But I do expect that we'll start to see a fair number of migrants, especially this time of year, for the songbirds on the boats as we kind of come in and out of the coast. But the answer is always going to be great shearwater, I think, in general. There's a lot of them out there.
Couple more questions. We did have someone ask, do you or have a recommendation for a good field guide or book for North American pelagic bird identification?
Bird identification is tough. There isn't really one great book for just seabirds. I can highly recommend, what's it called here? There's a field guide to North Atlantic wildlife. That's a great book. I take that out to see. That will have some of the birds in it. Bird drawings are not the best in that one. You could take a Sibley with you and that would kind of balance it out, but it includes most of the common sharks and dolphins and whales and other things like that in there. So I take that one with me on every cruise just because it's got a little bit of everything in there.
And I'll add on to that. There's a worldwide pelagic book that's called Seabirds, the New Identification Guide, that came out about 2 years ago or something. It's a big book. Yeah. But it's a great resource to have. Another question, let's see, we had a question regarding the best resources for marine weather.
Ooh, so NOAA is obviously one of them, given that they run the National Weather Service. But we also use eWeather quite a bit. They can do a pretty good wave height predictors, because that's a big issue for us when we're putting things over the side and collecting water samples and stuff. So we actually do use the weather quite a bit. And windy is also another one. Windy's
very good. Sarah Middleyer, one of our board members, asks, how did you learn to identify pelagic birds?
That's a great question. I did do a few pelagics on the side as I was gaining more interest in seabirds. Obviously, there is things to learn from a field guide, but I would say the best way to learn is by experiencing. And there is definitely a learning curve. Once you get out to sea, you realize what you don't know and start to realize that there, weather and light and, wind can affect how you see a bird and how a bird flies and things like that. So for me, again, keeping those key ID points in the back of my head and spending time at sea and piecing them together has been just the most successful way to learn identification.
Perfect. Well, one more question. Someone asked, have you seen the green flash?
Great question. I have not seen the green flash, and man, it's a hot topic. Some people would die on that hill that they have seen the green flash and they swear by it. And some people think it's a complete myth. I have not seen it. I have tried to see it, but I have not. So I'm kind of leaning towards a myth, but we'll see. Time will tell.
We'll do one final question here from Sarah Faulkner. What would you recommend to high school students to aim them in the direction of NOAA or Seabird Observer?
Yeah, I mean, taking classes if you can at your high school or college level to at least expose you to those sort of things. When I sail on those bigger cruises like Spiroba or ECOA, they have a number of undergrad researchers with them. There's usually internships that are available, and those project groups will allow spots on the boat for undergrads to gain research experience. Those generally tend to be a little more physical science based. It is obviously a little more hard to do observing internships. It's a little less grunt work, I would say. So it is harder to do things like that as an undergrad. In my personal experience, I went to NFA here in Norwich, and I was able to take zoology and marine biology and classes like that. That definitely led me to the biology field in general. And then undergrad was definitely a connection for that as well. And just following your passions kind of brings you to those spots too.
Perfect. Well, it's 8:02, so we're just about finished. There's a lot of thank yous and well dones in the chat. Very informative, very interesting, very well done. Thank you, thank you. So
Thanks,
well
guys.
received. To everyone still here, thanks again for coming. The next Young, Gifted, and Wild About Birds will be on March 16th, and that's Miko Jimenez. We'll hope to see you there. But again, everyone, thanks for joining us, and thank you to Allison for a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Matt.